Tariffs, and the American farmer is at crisis. Here to help us sort it all out is Brian Reisinger. He is a fourth generation farmer along with his sister, and he is a best selling author of a new book called Land Rich, Cash Poor: My Family's Hope, An Untold History of the Disappearing American Farmer. Brian, welcome to The Truth. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's good to be with you.
Thank you. And you know, you and I do have something in common. When I grew up a long, long time ago as a little boy in mid-Ohio, all of my relatives were farmers. And my dad, we lived in town. He was an automobile dealer, but we would go out to the farms on weekends and play, and we'd milk the cows. I'd chase a pony for an hour to ride it for 15 minutes before he bucked me off. And I'd chase the little kittens for an hour to finally be able to catch one. It legitimately are some of the fondest memories that I hold in life. And you have had your ancestors and your dad have farmed in Wisconsin, and it's not all rainbows and butterflies these days, is it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's a way of life that has beauty to it, but a lot of times that beauty goes hand in hand with the hardship. I grew up with many of the things that you're talking about. I remember coming down to the barn, and my dad would be helping a cow that was having a hard time in labor, and he'd help deliver the calf, and we watched that calf take its first breaths. Beautiful things like that, working with my dad sun up to sundown, but also, the economic upheaval that farmers face these days. And really it's deep in our history. In the book, we explore all the hidden areas of history that are driving the disappearance of our family farms. We've lost 45,000 farms per year on average for the past century, and it remains a crisis to this day. And, we weave those issues with our family story across four generations. And I can tell you that beauty and that hardship goes hand in hand, as you say.
Well, I have always had the perception that farmers work incredibly hard. I remember my great uncle, he lived well into his 80s and he was still doing the chores, and his face was so weathered and wrinkled because he was exposed to the elements. It was hot in the summer and just absolutely frigid cold in the winter when he would go out and feed the sheep. I remember it vividly, and I had a great deal of empathy for how hard he worked. The benefit to me was that I had some great role models.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I am so privileged and grateful to have grown up on a farm, because you learn so many things. You learn about the circle of life, you learn about hard work, you learn about God's miracles. Working close to land, working with the animals. It's incredible the things that kids are exposed to when they get the chance to be around it. And that's one of the things that we're losing. We're not only, as our farms struggle, we're not only losing parts of rural America, which matters to me. We've got parts of our rural economy in small town America suffering in part because our farms are disappearing, but also, it affects the values of our country, the things that people learn when we get further and further away from our food. And also the crisis is affecting the price and health and security of our food too. So it really affects every single American dinner table, whether someone's had a chance to set foot in a barn or not.
Well, aren't our federal tax policies the real enemy for farmers, in that when someone passes the farm on to the next generation, the taxes are so high? A lot of farmers just haven't been able to hold on to the family farm.
Yeah, it's one really good example of the challenges. There are so many, but a big one is federal tax policy, and the death tax, what they call the inheritance
Yeah.
tax, is a huge part. The reality is that you got the older generation trying to pass the farm to the younger generation. A lot of times the younger generation buys the farm from the older generation, so that the older generation can retire, because farmers don't have 401ks, things like that. So that those processes are difficult enough. But if you have someone who passes away in the middle of that, now you got a family that now they're going to get that farm, and the taxes they have to pay on that inheritance can be crushing. And when you combine that with the cost of already trying to operate that farm, it can make the difference. It can be the thing that forces a family to sell, and it forces them to sell when they're at their most vulnerable. There's a loss in the family, they're grieving, and then on top of it, they got this huge financial burden that makes them have to sell the farm. It's absolutely tragic, and it's definitely one of the drivers of why our farms are disappearing.
So, what are your main crops, or the main focus of the family farm in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so for more than 100 years, we milked cows. We were a classic Wisconsin dairy farm, small dairy farm, 50 cows. In spring of 2021, my dad decided to sell the cows because we were either going to have to get bigger, go to hundreds of cows, maybe thousands of cows, or make a change. And some families decide to get bigger. Everybody's got to make their own decision. For us, we felt like it had been enough, and we decided to diversify. So now, what we're doing is my dad and sister are raising heifers to be milk cows on other dairy farms. They're raising beef for consumers, and they're raising cash crops. And we are constantly looking for new crops and new products that can be solutions for our farm. That's part of what I do with writing about these issues and having the honor to tell our story. I do a lot of talking to people about solutions, and I try to bring those solutions back to our farm to try to figure out what else can we do, what new forms of income can we find, because that's one of the big challenges for farmers is that costs have been going up, 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 and there hasn't been a whole lot of new entrepreneur opportunity for farmers. A lot of farms are stuck in kind of old broken markets that the price isn't keeping up with the cost of what it takes to do business.
Well, it sounds like the farmers are under assault from in every direction. You've got all the perils that the weather bring or don't bring, and then you've got ever-changing market conditions where the commodity prices seem to be being controlled by somebody else that the farmer himself has little control over. And then I saw a really fascinating interview just earlier this week, serendipitously, with a beef cattle farmer that explained that the regulations that our own federal government impose make it an unbalanced marketplace with foreign suppliers of beef who don't have regulations, and they're pumping these cows full of steroids and antibiotics and all this stuff, and you're prohibited from doing the things that foreign growers are allowed to do. And so there is a very unbalanced competitive landscape because they're able to bring their product into the country for a lot less money than what you have to spend to comply with the regulations.
Yeah, there's so many problems, and one of the things with the federal regulations is that it hits the medium and small size farms the hardest, because they don't have the money for the lawyers and accountants and lobbyists and things to influence the policies. And so you got, a lot of your small family farms are affected the hardest, and you're absolutely right. There's all kinds of unfair, improper imbalances in terms of the type of competition that farmer faces. If you give the American farmer a level playing field and you give them a chance for markets that are legitimate, you can't beat the American farmer. They're efficient, they're resourceful, they're hardworking. It's everything you want it to be. But the reality is that we've had the deck stacked against the little guy in this country for decades, and as it stands right now, it continues to be a very serious challenge.
So, are you committed to the family farm for your career and your lifetime, or are you going
Great
to
question. So
gravitate toward being an author, which you're evidently very good at?
well, I appreciate that. We struggle with that in the book. I'm honest about it. Growing up, I loved my roots. I loved growing up where I did, and I worked with my dad from the time I could walk. But I didn't have the talent for cattle and crops that he did, and so I'm very honest about that in the book, and talk about how what led me to decide to pursue a career off the farm. And for a long time, I felt that I'd let my dad down. I was the first generation in four eldest sons who wasn't going to take over the farm for my career. And I hoped that maybe my sister would, and she did have that talent for cattle and crops that I didn't. Now I've had the chance, the real honor, to come full circle. I went and I worked in journalism, then I worked in public policy, and I've come back around and had the chance to focus my writing around our farm and the challenges facing our farmers. And so, I'm grateful for that, and I view my role as telling our story. And also, I've had the chance to get re-engaged with the farm. I help out on the business side. They throw me in a tractor on my day off, and so we're all part of the family operation trying to carry it forward. And I'm grateful my sister is gonna take over for the next generation, and that I can just kind of be a part of that in my own way. But it was a real struggle, and it was a challenge that we talk about in the book, because each generation, you do feel like it's your responsibility to carry things forward. And so I'm trying to do that in my own way. But if my dad and I, although he was supportive of me all throughout my life, I think if either one of us had a magic wand, we'd wave it and have me back on the farm with the kind of talent and gifts that it took to carry things forward like he did.
Well, life has a unique way of pulling us in multiple directions based on a plan. I think it's probably God's plan. So I wouldn't beat yourself up too bad about it. Sounds like you made a pretty nice life for yourself and reconciled that with your folks. Have you been able to, have your folks, your sister, your dad, have they been able to mechanize? We just talked to a preeminent scholar on artificial intelligence and robotics. There have been significant advances in the way that we farm today, from what I've understood. Have you all been able to incorporate these practices? Tell us about some of the things that are out there.
Absolutely. Absolutely, as much as we can. Technology, you're absolutely right, is a huge tool for advancement. It's been a big part of American agriculture moving forward. There's also elements of it that are a double-edged sword, and I'll explain what I mean. On our farm, we've got modern machinery. We're always looking to figure out how we can innovate next. But one of the things that's happened to our family farms is that America has begun to produce less and less of what they call scale neutral technology. And the AI that you're talking about could actually help solve this.
Hmm.
But the challenge, the problem that we have is that throughout the second half of the 20th century, and we talk about this in the book, the technology that we had began to be the kind that only worked for larger farms. It wasn't the kind that could work for large as well as medium and small farms. And so there was less and less technology that is practical for the family farm, and less technology that is affordable for a lot of our farms. And so technology has moved all of American agriculture forward, and also begun to leave many farms behind. Now, AI could be an example of something that could go either way and could help solve this. So, for example, if AI is used to create a whole bunch of great big machinery that really only works for really, really large farm fields, et cetera, you can imagine a world where you got a guy watching a NASA bank full of screens on a great big farm, and that's all the kind of technology that AI provides, right? But if we could have small modular vehicles, and this is something that's in development because people are thinking about this, small modular vehicles where you might have, and let's say it's used to help fertilize a field with some nice natural fertilizer, or organics, or whatever the case may be. You could have a medium and small size farm buy one or two of them. You could have a larger farm buy multiple of them. And it's something that's scalable, where it's affordable. And that's something that we do need, because we have a world where, although innovation is incredible, it hasn't been geared toward working for farms of all sizes and types. And I think that's what we need in order to bring our farms along, given how many we've lost over the decades.
So, what's the influence of tariffs right now on the American farmer? It's obviously a topic that is the forefront of every conversation that we have today. It seems like it is ubiquitous, that it influences every single dimension of our economy. How do you believe that it will affect your family farm?
Absolutely. Tariffs is one of those examples of an issue where farmers are caught in some cross-cutting winds. And what I mean by that is there are a lot of farmers who support getting tough on trade. There are a lot of farmers who know that China, and the way that it operates not above board, has depressed prices and had other ways that they're kind of screwing the American farmer. And then at the same time, you'll hear ag groups and you hear farmers talk about how, they are subject to retaliatory tariffs. When we start putting tariffs on other countries and the other countries put tariffs on us, that can make it harder for American farmers to sell their goods abroad. And farmers do need to be able to sell their goods in America and abroad to be able to make it. So you get a lot of farmers who are supportive of the idea of getting tough, and maybe support, drawing some hard lines, but we also need to work through these negotiations and get to a solution. Now, we've drawn a lot of hard lines with countries all over the globe. And I think the big question for farmers right now that a lot of them are watching is, okay, are these negotiations going to land in a place where we're going to get some fair deals? Are we advancing negotiations forward? So that's what I hope, is that, in these places where we've drawn these hard lines, there's an opportunity to make more fair trade deals, so that we can have tougher, fairer trade, but also still have opportunity out there, without making it harder for farmers. So it's all about kind of what we do next at this point.
Is the new administration, do you think, are you optimistic and hopeful that they're going to help the American farmer? You got Robert Kennedy over there working on making sure that we eat healthy. That's been a big platform of his. And then you've got a new director of agriculture who I saw a great interview with yesterday. She is insisting that she's going to make life better for farmers. But you've got so dang much regulation, like everybody else does in America industry today. What do you think the future holds for you in this current administration?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's an administration that got so much of its support from farm country and from
Totally.
rural communities. And
Yeah.
so I do think that as a result of that, there's a lot of conversation going on between uh, rural America and this administration, a lot of conversation going on between ag groups and administration officials. And I think that the American farmer has always lived with kind of the opportunity and the risk that comes with government. And I think that, when you talk about, you know, RFK, part of what that's a reflection of is the fact that people care more than ever about where their food comes from. So if we can create new entrepreneurial opportunity for farmers who can be growing food, fresh, local, regional, and specialty food that more and more American consumers are going to be interested in, that can be a good thing. Coming into the USDA and being willing to shake things up on regulations and subsidies and things can also be a really great thing. And so those things are opportunities. And at the same time, we're working through, complicated issues like tariffs, as you just asked
Yeah.
about, where there's a need and an opportunity to get tougher from the farming perspective on trade, but also a need to make sure that these hard lines are drawn, lead to negotiations where we can get a result. So it's a complicated picture, but I think that a lot of farmers gave support to this administration and are hoping that we'll be moving in a direction where we can begin to turn some of these issues around.
Well, I don't know you well, Brian, but you look like a pretty healthy, fit, uh, good shaped guy. You're not overweight. What's your diet consist of? What do you encourage people to eat?
Yeah, I'll tell you, as I was working on the book, we became even more conscious of our diet. We've always tried to be healthy, but boy, when you look at the fact that our food industry has been pumping out, overly processed food and all this stuff, and a lot of those things are tied to the ways that industry has moved to make things harder for farmers. So we do our best as much as we can to try to live out what I talk about in the book as far as solutions, which is one of the solutions is consumers trying to consume as much, local fresh food as they can. So we try to buy as much produce as we can from farmers markets, try to buy from grocery stores that carry local goods because there are grocers that are willing to do that if they know people will buy it, and we do our best to try to have as much fresh local food as we can, and we try to stay away from the processed stuff. And my hope is that more and more people can do that, and more farms can move in the direction of growing the kind of food that people who care where their food comes from want. And that's a direction that I hope our entire economy can go.
Well, I think one of the most staggering statistics that I've read of late is that we spend more on healthcare than any other nation in the world, yet we are way down the list in terms of our nation's health. And Kennedy again points to our food and diet as the reasons for, largely for the reasons for our bad health. I also, I mean, I got a lot of friends that are doctors, so if you're listening, no offense, but I stay as far away from doctors as I can. I've known too many people to go to that have gone to the hospital to get well and they never walk out again. So that's my formula. Just, I love doctors when I need them, but otherwise I'm staying the hell away. But are there any absolute foods that you prohibit or that you just refuse to eat?
I'm not all that doctrinaire about it. I think we just try to stay away from processed food as much as we can. When I was younger, grab fast food on the go kind of thing. We try to avoid that sort of thing as much as we can. I don't know if I have any real specific formulas. I think that my overall attitude would be, if it grew naturally out of the ground, it's probably a good thing. If it was formulated in the lab, you might want to be a little careful about it.
So the book is called Land Rich, Cash Poor: My Family's Hope and the Untold History of the Disappearing American Farmer. How's the book done so far?
Well, it's going great, and I'm grateful to say that. We've had sales all across the country, and we recently were named Book of the Year by the Nonpartisan Farm Foundation. And I do try to give honest input on policy issues from a nonpartisan perspective, whichever way the wind is blowing. And so it's a real honor. And I've had families all across the country reach out to me, and including farm families that relate to the stories that we tell, that have lived the kind of survival stories that we talk about today. And it's been incredibly rewarding. The other day, something that was really special for me. I was talking to a group of about 400 back home in Wisconsin, and my dad was there with me. He got the chance to see me speak, and at the end, they come through and you do the book signing. Well, my dad was standing there, and I had decided I was going to tell stories about him from the stage that day because he was there in the crowd, and people started walking up to him and asking him to sign the book, and that was such an incredible thing for me to have our worlds kind of merge that way, and for people to really honor him in what he's done with his life. It was a rare moment. I don't know if I'll get back in life.
That is such a wonderful story and a great way to end our interview. But I have to ask you one last question before I let you go. Did you ever grow hay on your farm?
We did, and we still do. Yep,
And you
we do.
store it in a barn?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And when I
So
was a kid, we did the small square bales that you
yeah.
had to move by hand.
So would you build tunnels through the barn with the hay?
I would. We built tunnels, we built forts, we swung on ropes like Indiana Jones, the whole deal.
Well, as did we. We would. My grandfather had this huge, beautiful barn. It had T.E. Gordon and Son painted on the top of it, and I don't know it. I was 5, 6 years old. It seemed like it was 4 or 5 stories tall. I'm sure if I went back and looked at it today, it'd probably be a matchbox. But we would build tunnels through the hay from the ground all the way up to the top and back down to the bottom. And why I'm here alive to be able to talk about it today, I'm not sure. But thank you, Lord, for protecting us because it seemed pretty high risk looking back on it. But
You
Brian
got
Reisinger, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure speaking to you. I wish you and your family well, and we certainly need our American farmers. So thank you for all of the sacrifices and the good work that you and your family have done.
well, thank you for having me. I appreciate all you do to raise awareness of issues, and I'm glad you made it through those hay tunnels. We don't want to have any hay tunnel cave-ins, so I hope kids are careful out there.
Well, they sure are happy memories, and I'm glad I was able to experience them. Have a great rest of your weekend. Come back anytime.
Thanks so much.